Welcome back to another episode of the Empowered Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have a special guest with us. Her name is Debbie Simmons. She's a mother of nine and through the miracle of adoption, and a woman whose legacy was born through loss. After the heartbreaking death of her quadruplets, her journey through grief became a catalyst for purpose driven growth. Today, she is the CEO and founder of Anchor Point, a faith based nonprofit that empowers families and supports women in crisis and equips leaders to navigate trauma with clarity and strength. In addition to her nonprofit work, Debbie leads the Debbie Simmons LLC, where she empowers entrepreneurs, ministry leaders, and business coaches to build legacies that outlast them. As a legacy coach, she helps others overturn adversity and make that into impact, guiding them to build businesses and missions that align with their God given purpose. Debbie's passion is helping others find clarity, courage, and confidence in their calling and inspiring them to live fully, love deeply, and leave a lasting impact. Her life is living proof that when you lead from the heart, even the hardest days can fuel you to your greatest legacy. And without further ado, I want to introduce you guys to Debbie. Debbie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you as well. I know you and I both have a shared bond in common that we both lost children at that very first stage of being a newborn. And I know for me, I lost a stillbirth, but you lost quadruplets. And I wanted you to share with the audience a little more about that story.
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. And I like to tell people that my story has lots of highs and lots of lows. So you like buckle your seatbelt. We're going to go for a ride. And so I just, some of the kind of background data is when I was very young, I had this thing in my mind that I wanted to be a young grandma. And it was because my parents were the youngest of very large sibling groups, and my grandparents did not exist by the time I got here. And we had a lady that adopted us as a grandma, and I loved being with her. And she taught me a lot. But she had multiple sclerosis, and I watched her suffer with that for many, many years. And so it taught me joy and suffering, but it also taught me that, hey, I want to be young and healthy and able to run around with grandkids. So I had this plan, right? So when you have a plan, I'm a girl that can work a plan. And I'm like, okay, let's see. To get to grandkids, you have to fall in love, get married, have children, then you get grandkids. And so I'm like, let's go. We're going to go. And so off in college, I met my husband, tried to convince him to get married before we graduated so we could get started on kids to get to grandkids. And he's like, no, we have to graduate. And I was like, bummer. And so after we got finished college, we got married. And I was like, let's start trying to have kids. And we went on a journey for about 4 or 5 years of infertility, which that in itself is a whole kind of grief process. And I remember very clearly as we got to the end of that journey, we had one last option to see about getting pregnant. And it was a fertility study at the College of Baylor Medicine. And we had 3 tries. And after the first try, my cycle came and I just was devastated. And I went home, threw myself on the bed, and I was like, I am a failure as a woman, as a wife, as a potential mother. This is terrible. I just wish, really, I just wish I was dead, because I'm like, I can't, I have this plan and I'm working my plan. I can't figure this out, and I can't make my body work the way my body needs to work to make this happen. And my husband came home, he was very encouraging, but, you don't fix your wife, you live with your wife, and so I was just like, "Ugh," and I was like, "Leave me alone tonight, I'll be fine tomorrow, I'll pick it up and we'll continue on," and so the next day came and we tried again, and the second time didn't work, and then the very last time we discovered we were pregnant, which we were very excited about. And we had 2 different doctors, 2 different ultrasounds, 2 hours apart. And both of the doctors told us we were having twins. So we were super excited. Twins, we'll do it. I was like, we'll do it two at a time. I want 4 kids. This is going to be great. And off we went. We told our family. We didn't quite know how we were going to figure it all out, but we figured it out as we went. And we're like, okay, we can handle these twins. We got this. So we told our family around 13 weeks. I was going up the elevator at the Exxon building, and I started bleeding everywhere. And this was before cell phones, so you can't just like call your husband. I ended up in the hospital in the emergency room, and when you have a infertility and a high risk pregnancy type things, it's always hurry up and wait. So you're just sitting there. And eventually they get me in the back and they say, okay, it looks like everything's kind of calmed down. Looks like you're attempting to miscarry. We put the Doppler on you. We can hear a heartbeat, but we're not sure if it's one or two. So rest up over the weekend, then go to your high risk doctor. So long weekend, made our way through that. And then we went to the high risk doctor on Monday, and we're sitting, waiting in the lobby. And I looked at my husband and I said, wouldn't it be interesting? We think we're going to lose one or maybe two of the babies that we carry. And I said, wouldn't it be funny if we went back there and they told us we were having triplets? I said, that'd be funny because we had figured it out. And my husband's like, yeah, that'd be funny. And so when you go to the high risk doctors, they have the biggest everything. Biggest cameras, biggest TVs, biggest everything, all these nice rooms, and everything. So we're in there, and as soon as she put the probe on my stomach, I was like, oh, there's three. And my husband's over there going, oh my gosh, because we had figured two out. Now we're like, wow, what are we going to do with three? And she did all her measurements, and she was like, let's just put all the babies on the screen and do one more picture for you, mom, and we'll print it out. I was like, okay. So she's moving her probe around, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, there's four. And I was like, don't look for any more. 5, 6, 7, 8. It's all high risk. It doesn't matter. Don't look. And she was like, so she did her measurements and she's like, I think I need to get the doctor. I'm like, for real? No joke. And so off she went and she got the doctor and she brought the doctor back in and she was so sweet. And she confirmed that there was four. And that's why I was trying to miscarry was because I wasn't taking care of 5 of us. And it's just a lot of work to do that. I didn't even know, right? And so my body was sending up warning signs. And the doctor said, well, I'll help you. We'll figure the way. And my husband and I knew that caring for is very hard. And we knew to make it to the next day was pretty amazing. So and at that point, by the time I got home that day, I was so like freaking out. And I don't usually freak out because I got home to my mom and I'm like calling her and I'm like, Mom, it's not 2, it's 4. And I said, oh my gosh, Mom, how am I going to do this? I can't even get all the car seats in the car. I can't get these kids home from the hospital. How do you deal with 4? How do you pay for everything? And I worked my way up and I was all the way to like, how much does college cost? And like, if they're all girls, how am I going to pay for their weddings? I was like, the whole lifespan was being right there in that one moment. And my mom very wisely said, hey, why don't you breathe and let's just do one day at a time? And I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. So I just like let it all drain off. And I was like, okay, what do I do next? What do I do next? And we just continued on our journey with our goal being with caring for to get to 30 weeks. So we started making the necessary changes that we needed to make and drinking a lot of water and all that good stuff. And off we go. And around 23 weeks, I'm very large at this point. We decide to go tour the hospital to see where we're going to be and the NICU and all that stuff to get to understand what we're going to be facing. And we're driving down the freeway to go to the hospital. Traffic stops and the car behind us hits us. And I remember telling my husband, I don't feel very good, but I couldn't really feel contractions or anything because I was just so large. And we did all the cop stuff. And I said, why don't we still go to the hospital? Because I just may not feel like ever coming back until it's time to come because I'm so big. And so we got to the hospital and I was like, I really, really, really don't feel good. And he was like, okay. And I told the staff, I was like, you need to check me in because you need to check and see if I'm having contractions because I don't feel very good. And I don't want to drive home and have to drive back up here. It's been a long day. I don't want to drive back up here if I'm having contractions. And lo and behold, I was having contractions 2 minutes apart. And so they got those all under control, and I stayed the night, and they sent me home, and they said, okay, you need to rest as much as possible and everything. But our goal was still 30 weeks. So we're 7 weeks away. And we went home. And at that point, Scott and I both knew that it was pretty miraculous to make it to the next day. And so each day we were super grateful for every day that we had, and the boys continued developing. And at 26 weeks, I woke up that morning and was tootling around in the house, and all of a sudden there's water everywhere, and I'm like, oh, my kidneys, they're sitting on my kidneys. I'm gonna have to wear a diaper the rest of this pregnancy. This is terrible. And then it dawned on me like, okay, it's not that. It's maybe your water breaking. And I was like, okay, what do I do with that? And what do? Go to the doctor and you hurry up and wait. And so as we were walking out the door, I told my husband, I said, hey, get the bag for the hospital, because if this is my water breaking, they're going to put me in the hospital till the rest of the pregnancy. And our goal's another 4 weeks away, right? So he said, okay. So we went to the doctor. They confirmed that it was one of the sacs that had ruptured. And they sent me to the hospital because there's a good chance that you might get infection and all this stuff. And they want to see how long they can keep the babies in there, because you need it for their lungs to develop and everything. So I wasn't ready for the hospital. They weren't ready for me. And this is another point in my life where I just kind of flipped out one day. And by the time I got to the hospital, I just was like, this is jail. I'm going to be here forever, and all these just things that just went through my head. And so I begged my husband to stay with me the first night, because I knew he couldn't stay every night. And I was like, please stay this first night with me. And I called my mom and I'm like, they put me in the hospital. It's horrible, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, we'll come from Mississippi to Texas. We'll leave real early in the morning. We'll get there around 9. I was like, okay. So Scott stayed the night with me. We made it through the night. And the next morning I woke up and I looked at him and I said, I am having contractions. I know it. And I said, go get the doctor. And he went and got the doctor. She came in and she confirmed that one of the boys was sticking his hand through a stitched cervix and waving to the world that he was going to come. And, I remember in that situation just going, okay, can you like stop everything? Like put the hand back and let's just not deal with this. Let's just forget this ever happened, right? You just want to stop time. And the doctor's like, no, you're going to have to deliver. And I'm like, really? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, "Ugh, is he going to be, but is he going to be able to make it? And the answer was probably no. And so my husband asked at that point, he said, what about the other 3 babies? And the doctor said, well, it depends on what Debbie's body does and how she responds afterwards. And so they sent me off to surgery to remove the stitches. And what do? You go back to the room and you wait. And so we waited. And about 2 or 3 hours later, little Zach arrived on the scene. And when he arrived, they simply took Zach and they placed him in my arms. And I just loved him and held him until he passed into eternity. And one of the neat little things that little Zach did was he took his hand and he grabbed my finger as if to squeeze and say, Mom, I'm here. And I just loved him. And we went through that, and then we waited to see what would happen. And they did some blood work, and they waited to see what my body would do. And by the time the blood work came back, I had 104-degree temperature and my body was flipping out and I was getting sicker. And the blood work confirmed all that. And they told us that we would have to induce the other 3 boys. And so they induced them. And a couple hours later, Josh, Nate, and Chris arrived on the scene, and they placed the boys in my arms, and I just held them and loved them till they went into eternity. And that was a long day. You go to the hospital in those situations planning a happy thing, right? And it's supposed to be a great day. And here I am trying to figure out, okay, how do I do 4 funerals? What do you do with that? Right. And so after everybody had kind of left and the dust had kind of settled, and Scott and I are in the room, and I asked him to stay with me that night. And of course he did. And I just remember thinking and going, I don't, I have this goal of being this young grandma and I can't get there. And I don't know how to get through all this pain now. And how do I do this? I don't, where do I even look? Where do I go? Right. And the only thing I could land on was I had loved Jesus my whole life. And I just said, I'm going to have to trust you. I don't know how to get through this without your help. I just don't know how. And what I learned, what was really cool that I learned is that, when we run into tough situations, the number one thing that wells up in me is this question of why. Why me? Why now? Why my boys? Why? And this is the thing that I just was like, why? It's not fair. It's this, all these things. And I can tell you, I can promise you, and that if God Himself would have stood in front of me that day, or anybody else in my life in the last 30 plus years, would give me the answer to my why, it would never satisfy. It would not solve my pain. It would not bring my boys back. It would not get me out of the situation I sit in. There is no satisfactory answer. And so here I am. I'm holding on to my why, and God whispers, "Give me your why." And I'm like, no, I like my why because it's the only thing I have left, right? That I'm holding on to, and it justifies my feelings. And he's like, trust me with your why. Give me your why. Because why is a stuck question. I can't move from there. And I was like, okay, God, I give you my why question. He's like, ask me a different question. And I'm like, what? I don't know what to ask. And I don't know how to get through this. And he's like, ask me, how do I survive? So that is the question that I started asking. I was like, how do I survive this? I don't know how to do this. How do I do this? How do I get through this? And that's a good question, because that means how gives me the ability to do something that helps me move through this. And the answer was, I need you to breathe. Okay, well, nice deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth. Okay, that means one, I'm alive. Okay, and two, it means that I'm now in my prefrontal cortex, which is where I can think. I'm out of my emotional part of my brain, and I'm moved up to where I can think. And the next part of that is, what is the next best step I can take? And so in that hospital room, and the days and weeks and months and years have come, I just began going, okay, what's the next thing I can do? What's the next best step? Not the next right step, because the next right step paralyzes us, because we often go, is that right? Or is that not right? And then we won't do anything. So the next best step, and I'm not some superhero, the next best step for me on some days was like, pull the covers off of my head, sit up in the bed, go brush my teeth, walk around for 30 seconds, and get back in the bed. That was success. And so those are the things I did. And the next day, maybe I could do something bigger. And then eventually bigger and bigger and bigger. And you get to go to work and do all these things. You just work your way through the healing process. But what I found is, and when I walked in faith and obedience and I did the next best thing, God showed up and met me. And He showed me the light at my feet to show me the next best step. And I did it again, and I did it again. And that is how my faith muscle began to grow in trusting Him with my story. And so as I did that, I began a journey of healing. Wasn't always easy, wasn't always big steps forward. It was step maybe sometimes backwards, and then let's go again. But I began this whole journey that I went on. And at some point in that journey, the question began to change. The question went from, how do I survive, to how do I thrive? Because this was the thing. I did not want to be stuck in those same emotions and feelings and all that stuff from when I lost my boys. I wanted to be able to live. I wanted to have joy. I wanted to be able to smile. And I wanted to experience life. And so I began to ask God, how can I thrive in this? How can I thrive? You've promised you redeem stories, and this is a hard story. You gave me a love of children. I don't know how all this works, but how do I thrive? And when we ask that type of question, we then create a situation where God can use our stories to do lots of things. So I began to work with other people who had lost children to lead grief groups. And that ultimately led us on a ride of adopting children and having 9 additional children come into our lives. It led to ultimately uh, God planting a seed for me to start a ministry that works with families and helps families thrive. And it impacts literally thousands of families every year. And so I'm blessed to be able to do that. To, in the last year and a half, God just saying, you need to write your book and the heart of legacy and how I can live a focused, faithful, and fearless life. And so all these things have come out of this very difficult season and time. But I will tell you, my boy's legacy lives on today in my life and in the opportunities that I have to make impact. And so it's not a journey that I would have necessarily signed up for, but it is a journey that I got to go on. And it's a privilege to be able to use that story over and over again to help bring people along. So that is my story of going through a very difficult grief cycle and learning to thrive coming out of it.
Well, Debbie, I really appreciate you sharing that story in full. And one of the things I love about you that I recognized when we first met is this story, especially if you lose a stillborn or have miscarriage in that area of life, is that we don't only lose them, but we lose this life that we idealized for ourselves, this life we planned for and wanted. And so it leaves us with a very raw feeling in life of why,
Mhm.
and we go there, right? The why question. Why did this have to
Yes.
happen to me? Why am I having to go through this? Why am I the chosen one?
Mhm.
And though, and like you said, that answer will never get satisfied. It just won't. And so
Mhm.
I love that you shared about your story, though. And you started with there's lots of highs and there's lots of lows. And I love that you shared what those were going
Yes.
through your grief journey because a lot of
Mhm.
people that do listen to my podcast are stuck in grief or they are going through a very heavy season of grief. And it can be very isolating. It can feel very alone. I love that you
Mhm.
said, by the way, through your story, asking your husband to stay there with you on certain nights, stay with you in this thing. I don't want to be alone. And feeling vulnerable enough to ask for that help and just be
Yeah.
general, be heartfelt with that. It's the word I'm looking for. And
Mhm.
asking for support from your family. And I think that
Mhm.
that's something that a lot of people who do go through grief today are forced to put a mask on, or we're forced to kind of hide
Mhm.
parts of our story or not grieve in front of certain people for fear of making them uncomfortable. And I think opening that door to say, it's okay to grieve the way you need to grieve, but this doesn't have to define you. And that's another big, powerful lesson I
Mhm.
took out of your story is grief doesn't have to define you. It's something that
Mhm.
happened. I use it in coaching. I always say these things don't happen to us, but they happen for us. And
Mhm.
that's not something I expect people to fully understand in the throes and the waves of grief because it's a very painful place. But when you
Mhm.
start to move through that season, that's when you can start finding that gift. And
Mhm.
that's what I love about your story and where this journey took you.
Yeah, and I do, just so you know, the last high is I do have grandkids now, and I'm still young, so I got there.
I love that.
It just wasn't a direct pass. So I have 15 grandkids now, and I get to do tons of fun things with them. But it wasn't a straight journey. It definitely wasn't a straight journey. But it is a love of my heart and my kids and my and everything. And I did get that, and that is special.
I'm glad you shared that. That was one of my questions I was going to get to, but I appreciate you answering that. The thing you brought up too, and I let my listeners have whatever faith journey they walk, but I walk that path with God with you. And I've learned that God doesn't always give us the cleanest path. He doesn't give us the straightest road to walk. It sometimes starts looking like this all over the place and taking us to places that we don't always necessarily want to be. And we always say, why am I going through this? Why did I have to be put through this? Could we not just get over here? But to hear you say that, by the way, and that's what I wanted to ask about grandkids, that you reached that goal, and God got you there, by the way. It was
Yeah.
just in a very, very rough path to get there. Um,
Mhm.
how do you feel, by the way? 'Cause I know you told me this. Losing your children happened about 3 decades ago, if I'm correct on that.
Yep.
How does it feel now where you're at today with grandkids and your ministry and your nonprofit and all the families you serve in your community down there in Texas? How does it feel looking back now and just realizing that that in a lot of ways set the stage for you to have all this beauty in your life that you have today?
Yes, God is faithful that He redeems stories. And if you look, like for instance, at Job's story in the Bible, he lost everything, and God gave it back to him many times over, right? And so God has done that for me. And the question for us in our challenging situations is, do I really trust Him? And do I believe that he's actually writing a good story? So, you can also, if you don't have faith, you can simplify it to, do I want to be bitter or do I want to be better? And if I'm going to, if I could, I was in my 20s. So I could just, you could have just, I could just die there, like literally emotionally die there. And I know women who lost children then, and they are still stuck, and you just have to want to live and to, have a reason to keep going. And that reason might be just surviving, right? And it's like, can I just find the next thing? And then trusting that there's still a good plan. And so I would say, hey, I I know it's hard, and it was very hard, and I'm not making light of that because, still today, if you ask me, and it's, my boys were born on April 1st, and if you go, if you get like about 6 or 7 days before April 1st, I don't really think about it as often anymore, but sometimes I'll find myself and I'm like going, why am I in a funk? And I'm in a funk because my body remembers, right? And the body keeps the score. And so this is part of me, and it's okay. That's still there. And I always encourage people as they go through challenging situations and grief like this is, what are the markers that you put in place to remember? So, like I have a ring that has the boys' birthstone on it and my birthstones, and that's just my mom's ring. And I wear it all the time. And it reminds me that they were here and they were mine and they were significant, our little precious moments with their names on it that had their delivery dates, our certificates that have their footprints on it, whatever we could find, and maybe sometimes we miscarry. You can do the same thing in miscarriage. You just have to find different way to put a rock in the ground. But, those are significant mile markers, that, now I look back and I go, okay, God saw me through that, and he never left me. It was hard, but he never left me. And friends helped me walk through that. And what a stronger, more resilient person I am today, than ever before. I will tell you that if my boys had survived and we were raising quads, none of those things that I said have come later probably would ever be in my life, because I'd have been too busy with the 4 boys, right? And so, their purpose is still very strong and is getting lived out here today. It's just different. And so I'm very thankful and I'm very grateful that I've had the life that I have the 9 children that I have, and that I have the opportunity to impact people. It is a special privilege to be able to walk in those spaces, because those are sacred spaces that, my kids come with very difficult backgrounds that no child should ever experience, right? And I get to walk alongside them as their mom, or the clients that we work with are usually struggling. And you get to be in those spaces with them and to watch them figure out how to get unstuck so that they can thrive. And that is someone helped me and I get to help them. And that is just a real privilege. So I'm just super grateful, that God has chosen to use me in that way and to allow me to experience those things because, um, you know, He could have chosen someone else. He chose me. And so that's a pretty special thing.
I think that's what I've come to find in the lost parent community is that a lot of us who have gone through child loss, and I'm very sorry you had to experience it fourfold from what I went through. I'm not I still have parts of me that say I don't know if I could handle that again. I'm not sure if I could. But I also know that because of those experiences, we become very compassionate, very empathetic people, very understanding people. Because we've seen a side of life where that life never even got a chance to live. It never got a chance to be part of this world. And that forever changes our format of how we live life. And I think that a lot of people who are stuck, and I see it a lot in Facebook groups, people have gone through what you and I have, and I know they get stuck, and I don't blame them, by the way. I was there. And so I understand it because it's a very heavy emotion. It's a very, I call it a moment in my life. The best way I can describe it is you almost die in that moment. The old version of you, the old person you used to be, is gone. It's not there anymore. There's this new person that comes out of that experience, and it really becomes, how do I redefine myself? How do I rediscover who I am? Who am I going to become through this process? Something that I share with a lot of lost parents is that honor those ones that you lost. Honor your rainbow baby. I'm very big about that. Honor and celebrate the legacy of your rainbow baby. They weren't just a baby that passed on. This was a part of your life. This was a part of you. And there's a big, big gift. I always say that God gives us gifts, lessons, and blessings through life is what happens. And when we realize that our children we lose in this process, stillbirth or miscarriage, are a gift to us, they really are. They change our world. They change who we are. Um, I wouldn't be doing my podcast if I hadn't gone through stillbirth. I wouldn't be coaching in the grief space, helping people navigate that if I hadn't gone through that loss. So I always try to encourage people in the loss community that this didn't happen to you, it happened for you. And your child that's not here, by the way, gave you a very big gift. And when you discover that gift, by the way, how powerful and impacting is that going to be in your life? And Debbie, you're an example of that. You lost your quads all in one moment, and you got a beautiful gift to help other women get unstuck from that. That's such a big gift that's beyond yourself and beyond them. It's just it's powerful.
It changes everything because I mean, I can clearly say that night in the hospital, everything looked different, and the world is still going at 100 miles an hour, and I am like, my life fell apart. Nothing stopped. And I'm like, I'm stuck, And so it's like this realization that we have to really understand to be gentle with ourselves, but not let ourselves off the hook. We have to be gentle from the standpoint of grief is a very funky thing and it doesn't look the same for everyone and it doesn't have the same pace for everyone, but we still get the opportunity to choose. We get to choose whether we're better or whether we're bitter. And life plays out of that. But you get to choose. You get to choose. You absolutely get to choose. And it's so powerful when we can choose better and to say, I just want to, I just had this deep desire to live and to smile and to love life. I'm like, what? I'm like, I'm still going to be here for lots of years. This is going to be terrible if I have to, live to 80 and I'm 27 or 28. And I'm like, that's a long time to be upset. And so
Yeah.
for me, I was like, I just can't figure my way out of, I don't want to be like that. I want to be better. And how do I do that? And so that's my biggest encouragement for people is we do get the power to choose, which is an extremely big privilege that we get to choose how we respond. And people watch how we respond. If you have other children and you've gone through something like this, they're watching. Other people are watching and they're watching to see how you can make your way through it. And the legacy we leave to those that watch that may never say anything is extremely powerful because you know what? They're going to run into hard times. And it may be just enough for them to know, oh, Debbie chose better. I can choose better. and I can do it one more day, one more minute. And so, like for me, some days it was okay, I made it 5 minutes and that was good. Then I'm like back to why? And I'm like, I have to put that down. And then, okay, how do I do this? And then you make it an hour, you make it 2 hours, you make it 3 hours, you make it a day, you make it a month, and it's like, okay, I just got to keep choosing better. I want to be better. And that is the secret to figuring our way through and to learning how to heal, and then being graceful with each other as we walk through those things, and having a support network, like you said, that can be extremely helpful, and not allowing ourselves. Our number one thing that we want to do in grief is we want to run and hide. And and especially like if you've had a miscarriage or maybe a stillbirth and nobody knew, and like you go through all of this and your world's like totally changed and nobody even knew you were pregnant. And so they don't even know to help, much less how to help. And so, it is partly our job to have safe people in our lives that do life with us and that can help us walk through that. And if we choose to just isolate, then it's a very dangerous, difficult place to be, because that will cycle into a lot of negative self-talk, a lot of, leading to depression, leading to, even suicidal thoughts, those type of things. And that's just not the way to live. So we have to be brave and courageous and let safe people help us. And some days my ability to thrive is built solely on the fact that someone looks in my eyes and tells me I still have value and I still have worth and I can get through this, right? And I have to lean on
Yeah.
that because my day does not feel like that, right? And so I'm like going, I just want to get in the covers. But community is where all of that stuff is broken. And the more I tell my story, and people tell me I still have value and I still have worth and I can still do this, then the chains are broken for me to be able to heal. And the more I tell my story, the more I heal, and the more I tell my story, the easier it becomes.
Uh,
And then it becomes just part of you, right? It's not your full identity. It's just something that has happened to you.
Well, I
Um,
think you hit on something very important, by the way, as safe people. That's something I
mhm,
love to talk about on my podcast. When I went through losing Caden, I didn't have many safe people around me, and I heard a lot of very inappropriate comments after going through that. And I know I've heard it from a lot of lost parents that go through that. When you talk about safe people, I always like to refer to that as people that will hold space for you, people
mhm,
that will not judge you or tell you to put a mask on because they're uncomfortable with your grief or uncomfortable with your loss, but people that just simply say, I'm here to listen and hold space. And sometimes those safe people, by the way, don't always have to say anything. I talked to a chaplain at a hospital in Pennsylvania who's on my podcast a few episodes back, and she said one of the biggest things I tell people is shut up, just don't say anything, because she said grievers don't want to hear you try to fix them. They don't want to tell you it's going to be okay. They don't want you to write off things. They want to feel listened to. They want to feel heard. They want to feel understood. It doesn't have to make sense to you because it's their journey. But
mhm,
just your presence of who you are can make them very comforted. And so I just want to touch on that because you were talking about safe people.
mhm,
I encourage people to go through grief, especially if you've lost a child the way Debbie and I have. Go to the lost community of parents, people that, like I said, are part of a club you don't want to be part of. Go to those people. They have nothing but compassion and empathy and love for you, and they're people you don't even know. Um, they're
yeah,
they're going to be part of your journey. And to Debbie's point, by the way, those people will lift you up, and they'll lift you up, by the way, in the right way, not with toxic positivity or telling you it's going to be fine or you'll be over it in a month. But they're going to be the people that say, let me walk this journey with you. Let me show you
mhm,
how I'm navigating this and what I've learned on my journey. And I think, to your point, Debbie, when you talked about community, find the community of those people, because losing a child, and for instance, is one of the hardest things, if not the worst thing I've gone through. And to be around people that have that ability to hold space for you and be compassionate, it really makes it a little easier. Um,
Mhm.
for you to
Yeah.
navigate that grief journey.
Yeah. Now, I would challenge us a little bit that we ought to also be open to, those people are the right people, but we also need to have them not just let us sit. We need to be open to them pushing us just a little bit to move so
Mm,
that we don't just stay. Because somebody could listen to me just over and over and over and over and over and over and over, and I'm like going, we have to move. You can't stay here. You got to do this hard thing. And so come on, it's this person that is willing to drag you out somewhere and say, let's go get a walk. Let's do something, just anything to help you move in a healthy direction too. And, you and I have to give people permission to do that and
mhm.
encourage us that way, and those people will do that for you. And that is
Yeah.
what we need for the healing journey ourselves, is that, loving people who push us a little bit sometimes, because I'm like, I don't want to go anywhere, I just want to stay right here. And they're
Yeah.
like,
Well, yeah.
come on. And so one of the most favorite things that, I don't tell people to not say anything, I'm just say, tell them you love them, give them a hug, and just be in that space, hold them. Like you said, I always tell women, when I was early on, I was like, look, you just tell me. I said, we'll go lay on the beach, we'll take a six-pack of Coke, and we'll just howl at the moon together. I don't care. Let's just, we'll do this. And everything that we feel in grief, sometimes people, tell us that that's not right. And our feelings are okay. It's all right to feel all these things. And it's a super big range of emotions that you have when you walk through with grief. You might be mad, you might be angry, you might be okay, you might be even a little happy one day, and you just got to cycle through all this stuff. And I think you and I talked about, the fact that grief, you have to go through a whole new year of no of figuring out what your new normal is.
We did
Because
talk about that.
yeah,
Yeah.
because everything is different, right? I mean, everything. My boys were born on April 1st, and guess what? Guess what the next celebration is? Let's see, Mother's Day. Okay. So,
Yep.
I'm sitting in a church service, and it's a great church service, and they're going, let's celebrate moms. And if you're a mom, stand up. And I'm like, ugh, do I stand up? Do I not stand up? And then they're like, who just had the baby most recently? And I'm like, and so
Yeah.
I looked at my husband. I was like, dude, I am going to sit outside. Can't take this. And that has to be okay, right? Now, the
Yeah.
second Mother's Day was better. And the third Mother's Day was better, and I've had chances since then to educate pastors to say, look, when you celebrate Mother's Day, it's wonderful. But there are lots of women that are sitting in here that desire children that can't have them.
Mhm.
They're moms that want to be, right? And so you have these in there. I said, you have moms who have lost children in miscarriage, and you don't even know the
Yeah.
pain that they are sitting in. And the way
Well,
you celebrate it, like they're not even coming on that Sunday because it's so painful, or like me, who got to be with my children, but they were here only for a short time and I lost them, and so there's this whole, so how can we create a Mother's Day that honors moms and honors all of these moms, from that perspective? And so, you get to speak into those things, and teach compassion and teach, because they are not celebrating to hurt my feelings, right? They are celebrating because that's what they know to do. And I'm like, hey, have you ever thought of this? Or what about this? And how could you change just the wording that you use that makes it inclusive for all of us? Um,
well,
so, and
I
so
think
that's
one
a
of the big things you touched on, by the way, it is about grief, is that it's a journey. And I love what you've said today so much. I just want to touch on this because you talked about it right in a second. Taking baby steps in the grief process. And I always tell people grief doesn't have a time frame on it. Some people grieve a month, some people grieve a year, 5 years. But what Debbie shared today is really important that I wanted to highlight. Notice how she's talked about this whole episode, taking steps, just one step at a time. And those are not giant leaps, they're tiny steps. And I think that's very important to recognize that when you do take tiny steps every day, just like you shared with the pastor, that tiny step of, hey, there's moms in this church who have their children alive right now and they can celebrate that. There's moms like Debbie that have lost their children. There's people like me that they never got to even come to the world alive. There's people who have children in all different capacities. And so Mother's Day isn't a general topic of just one version of being a mom, it's a version of many. And
Hmm.
to take that grief journey one step every day, and that can be 5 minutes, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, is where that journey goes. And I just love the way you said that, Debbie. I just wanted to highlight
Yeah.
that, because that's a
Yeah. And
very
it's,
important thing to recognize.
well, and the other thing to not forget is we want to make positive steps, right? But every day is, and every step doesn't always end up being positive. Sometimes I would make two or three positive steps and then I have one step backwards, but I still chose again to be better. And so then I got four or five steps and then I had two that went backwards and then, and so but over time, I've gone a long way in a positive direction, even though it was like, all this time.
Yeah.
And it's okay, right? It's okay if I completely break down into a puddle on day 20. It's
It
okay.
is. There's
Because the
times in grief
right.
that being happy feels weird. I don't know if you experienced that or not, but it was about my first year, I think, after losing Caden. I found myself one day being happy and I smiled and I caught myself and went, "Ugh, what is this?" Like scared myself out of it because I was in the throes of grief. And I
Mhm.
wanted to normalize that since we were talking about that similar topic, that when you're going through grief, you're going to feel emotions all over the place. You hinted that a little earlier today, but you're going to feel sometimes like life is fine, it's okay, almost like you never experienced it. And then the next day, it just comes back like a roaring ocean, and you feel those deep throes of emotion. And so I think it's important for people to understand, and listeners on my podcast get this a lot, but you're going to feel everything from happy to sad to angry to frustrated to overwhelmed. You're going to feel those things all over the place. And that was
Yeah.
another message I wanted to continue to bring back to, like you said, that first year after going through grief, going through loss, whatever it is, it really is rediscovering who you are because you're experiencing all those things all at once and trying to
Mhm.
get that new baseline.
Yeah, and it's a new normal. So I always like to say, hey, what it was before is no longer. It's going to be a new normal and it's different and it's okay. It can still be good. And I think the other thing that, for people who go through grief, especially losing children, there usually is a spouse involved, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things that we need to realize is that most people who lose children end up divorced. And the reason is because we grieve on different cycles. So I might be doing really well and he might be down here and our communication we just aren't connecting. And then next thing you know, he's up and I'm down and we're miscommunicating and everything. And that we just have to be very committed to each other to say, hey, we're going to have a lot of grace with each other and we are not the enemy, and that we are for each other, and that is something that Scott and I just committed to do. The key was holding grace and space for each other in that
I
process.
love that. Grace and space. I love that. That's a great phrase. I haven't heard that one
Mhm.
yet.
Yeah,
But you're right, Debbie. I've talked to a lot of people who've gotten divorced after losing a child, and the thing that I've realized about when you're in a relationship and that environment, by the way, is that sometimes your spouse is going to be an internal griever and you might be an external griever, or vice versa. And everybody goes through grief individually. I don't care if you're married or whatever, but everybody
yeah,
goes through it differently and processes things differently. And I love what you said about holding grace in the space, because that's where you can understand and learn how one another grieves. And that too, by the way, will actually bring you together because you'll take
right.
little things from that other perspective you don't have, and you yourself will grow. As the counselor that we worked with after losing Caden said, you grow together through this. This isn't
Yeah,
something that has to break
yeah,
you apart and go
yeah.
down. It doesn't have to. You can grow together from this. And
And we'll be stronger on the other side, and then I think it's really hard. This walking through this grief process is especially hard for men. It's hard for women, but the reason it's hard for men is because, my husband's deepest desire is to protect me and
mm,
to take care of me and everything. And here he has a wife that is a puddle, and he can't fix me. He can only be with me, right? And so it's very hard for the guy. What do I do then? That is my role, is to encourage her and to love her and to build her up and fix her up. And we got this, and he doesn't get to do that. And so that's a very helpless feeling, to know how to come alongside a grieving wife, from that perspective. Women don't generally feel like we need to fix, things. So we can enter into that emotional space with my husband better, and he may not know how to grieve, but so it's just how we're wired differently. But it is really hard for our guys because you can fix everything, and you can't fix this, right? And so it's challenging that way.
It really is. That's something I learned in the lost community of dads is that there unfortunately is not a lot of support for dads that go through losing a child. There's just not. And it's hard because men have to sit there in silence or get angry about it because that's what we're taught. And then on top of that too, when we're dealing with our wife that just went through this the way you did, we can't, there's nothing we can say or do that's going to change that. We also can't fix it. We can't bring them back to life. And so we're stuck there. Men are naturally fixers. It's in our
Right.
DNA. We're naturally fixers, and
Yeah.
I think that
Mm.
that makes it very hard for people, men in particular, to say, "Well,
Mhm.
now what do I do? I've got a situation I can't change," and so we
Right.
we have to
Yeah.
learn how to navigate that together. So I think
Yeah, and
that's
that's why the together is powerful. I think the other a really cool thing that we did, which I think is super powerful, if you miscarry or you lose children and stuff like that. And we can only say that God put this idea in my head, is that when we came home, most
hey
people,
Debbie.
yeah,
I'm gonna edit this part of the podcast out. Can you repeat what you said? Because Zoom just like cut it out.
yeah. I said, okay. One of the other things that I think is very powerful is, when we came home from the hospital, and I would say it was only by the grace of God that the seed got planted in my head, is that, most people didn't even know that we had been at the hospital and had lost the boys and came home. And so even though we're grieving, we can help people know how to help us better too. Okay. And so we actually, when we got home, we wrote a one-page letter, and it was a birth announcement and it was a funeral announcement. And we sent
Mm.
that to everyone we knew that knew that we were pregnant, everyone we could think of. And that was a wonderful tool to honor my children, but it also was a wonderful tool for someone who received it, that they were able to process it and then kind of know how to deal with me. So I didn't have to worry about people calling me and going, "Hey, how's the pregnancy going?" or "How's this going?" or whatever. And I go, "Well, they died." That's a bummer phone call, right? So it laid the foundation for people to be able to go through kind of their shock experience, in a unique way that didn't make it super awkward for us. Because the one thing I was very conscientious of, was I did not want pity. Um, I wanted
Mm.
support and I wanted people to love me. And we did a memorial service for the boys. And I remember the morning of the memorial service, I woke up and I told my husband, I said, "I think I'm supposed to talk." And he was like, "Are you serious?" And I said, "I think so. And I don't know what I'm supposed to say, but I think I'm supposed to talk." And so when we got there, we were talking to the pastor, and I said, "I think I'm supposed to talk." And he's like, "Okay, well, when I get to this part in the service, I'll look at you. And if you shake your head, then I'll know you want to talk. But if you don't want to talk, it's okay." And I was like, "Okay." So we went through the service, and I'm like going, "Am I supposed to talk? Am I not supposed to talk? Am I supposed to talk? I'm not supposed to talk?" I have this whole thing going on in my head. And when it got to that part, and he looked at me, and I was like, "Yes, I want to talk." And he was like, "Okay, Debbie wants to say a few words." I was like, "Oh God, I don't know what I'm saying, but okay." And you know what I told people? Because I think any way that we can help people is super powerful to help us, because people want to help us, and be supportive. And so I got up there and I said, "Thank you so much for coming today. It means the world to us. And I want you to know that this has been very difficult, and the days ahead will be difficult. And so we definitely need your prayers, and we definitely need your love and support and stuff like that. And I said, but I don't want you to feel pity for us. I said, this was extremely hard. And at this point in my life, this was true, the statement I'm fixing to say. I said, you know, while it was really hard and I held my boys as they passed away, I said, you know what? I had perfect children and I was a perfect mom. And most of you can't say that, and I was like, and so all I had with these children was just pure love. I never had a child that talked back, all these things. And I said, so it was special. And my children are in heaven, and my children I'll be reunited with. And so this is not the end. This is not a horrible thing. It's very difficult. And so pray for us. And I can't tell you how many people came up to me crying. And I'm like, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And I was like, it's all right. We're going to figure our way. And, so I think the more that we can help them, because I'm like, don't tell me I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, it was special. It was hard. It was special and sad. And so I think, just helping people understand how to help us because they want to be supportive of us is as much as we can do it, or have friends in our life that can help friends understand how to do it. That is extremely powerful to end the journey that we're going on.
Well, Debbie, I just want to say I love that story that you said in church, and I'm grateful that those people held so much more compassion. And I find it funny you were the one consoling them, by the way.
Yeah.
At that point, it's funny how that works out sometimes.
Well, and I
Um,
will tell you, I'm no longer a perfect mother anymore, and I don't have all perfect children. Now that we've got these 9, I've managed to mess that record up.
I love
So,
that.
yeah.
Well, Debbie, as we wrap up the podcast, I usually ask my guests two questions as we wrap up. One of them is if you were to run into somebody who's going through grief or feels stuck in grief for that matter, what's one thing you would share with them to help them navigate that journey just a little bit easier?
If that is your journey today, what I would say is that you're deeply valued and you are deeply loved and you are not forgotten. God knows exactly what is going on, and He is there for you if you'll lean in. But the day will get better. The light will come, and you will make it through this, and you will be stronger. And I just want you to know it is worth the journey to live again.
That's beautifully said, Debbie. I couldn't agree with you more on that. And
Mhm.
if listeners today want to reach out to you and connect with you, where can we find you?
Sure. You can find me at DebbieSimmons.com. And I have a wonderful book there. It's called The Heart of Legacy that they may find very interesting. It has a lot more of my story in it, but it also talks to us about how we can be focused, faithful, and fearless in our legacies. And, this journey has taught me to be extremely intentional about the legacy that I want to leave. In the end, so you have to live your legacy now, and that might be a great resource. And then the other great resource is a book by Jack Hayford, and it's called I'll Hold You in Heaven. For infant, miscarriage, stillborn, that type of loss. And it's a short, good read, and it just gives you a wonderful perspective. So, the Debbie Simmons and those two books would be great next steps for someone.
Well, I want to thank you for being a guest on today's podcast. I'm going to have all your links to your website and social media and the book you have in the show
Mhm.
notes. So for listeners today, as we wrap up the podcast, look in the show notes to get a hold of Debbie. You guys can visit her website links. She's a beautiful person with an awesome story, as you guys have found out today listening to the show. And Debbie, again, I just want to say thank you so much. This has meant a lot to me to have you on the podcast today, and I've learned a lot from hearing your story and your journey.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. And I enjoyed it.
Well, I want to thank our listeners for joining Debbie and I on today's episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this resonates with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Debbie's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empowered Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you guys to know you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.